the intro whenever you're ready.
All right. Well, welcome everybody to Account-Based Friday. It is our last session of 2021, and we are delighted to welcome Ann Ward, who is the esteemed leader of her company. It's Ward certified,
Ward
right?
certified. Yep.
Ward certified. That's what I thought. I didn't want to misstate it, but and I've had the pleasure of working with Ann for many years, along with many of the people on my former employer's team. But Ann's done a lot of good for a lot of people throughout the B2B space, and I'm excited for her to join us today and share some of her perspectives on communication and engagement and presentation and customer service and all things how to really help companies thrive in this time of change and time of distancing and all these other words that we hate using still. But it's always good to have somebody who thinks about that professionally and can help us with some of the challenges that we have. And we're super excited to start that out. But before I do that, and thank you, Ann, for joining us and taking time in a busy time of year, I'll turn it to John to share the poll.
Sure
of the
thing.
week.
Let me pull up the poll. As I pull up the poll, I too share Megan's excitement to have Ann on. Ann, I've seen a lot of your work, and I'll certainly have a lot of questions for you as we progress here. But yeah, each week, as many of you know that are returning here, John and Joe, thank you for returning. We start each week with a poll, and this week's poll is account-based related. And we didn't have a ton of votes on this, but pretty interesting about the challenges that people see in really pulling off 2022 growth. And the four categories that I mentioned here: measurement, people, process, and technology. They were pretty close across measurement, people, and process. Technology really wasn't an issue, which may or may not be music to John's ears here, given that he sells technology for a living. But I had voted for measurement because we focus a lot on the measurement of account base, but also know that process is a really big issue as well, because it's almost invisible. Like, how do you, as a marketer, how do you get your mind wrapped around process? It's not a sexy or appealing thing, yet it's a necessary part of scaling a business. You have to have business process to scale and grow effectively. So I don't know, interesting results here. I don't know, Megan, did you have a point of view on this?
Yeah, so I agree with you on measurement, but I picked process because I kind of was voting with what I'm seeing in the market. And a lot of people are struggling with literally the what to do next, right? Interestingly, I think the how to do it, which to me is the tech piece to a large degree. I think a lot of people have made investments in tech, especially over the last year. I think that's why we've seen some of the outstanding results from a lot of the companies in the space. And I think we'll continue to see that. But I believe people are starting to run into the next order challenges of, oh my gosh, my people aren't really quite sure what they should be doing. And I've had to hire a ton of new people. And now our processes, because we're scaling, they're kind of falling apart because it used to be pretty manual. And now we're trying to get to or we've changed who we're marketing to, and we need to figure out what's going to engage them. So that also becomes, I think, a process flaw. But I think if you ask them 3 months from now, measurement would be the top of the list, because they're going to have made these investments. They'll have started on their 2022 plans, executing those plans, and they're going to start to run into, oh, wow, my measurement's not keeping pace with the things that are the reality of what I need to do to support my buyers and customers. And especially the lens I see it through is companies shifting to that recurring revenue mindset, where marketing's having to play a role in retention and expansion and more advocacy. And those things are not rewarded by our traditional system of measurement. And actually, I'm going to put a post in the chat from and someone well, Ross Graver, who just did a great post this week on the things in measurement that have to change. And my favorite line was, buyers have changed, your measurement has not. And I think that's just like at the heart of this issue. So I'm with you in spirit, John. I think, and give it a couple of months, let's ask again and see if it changes. That's my prediction. But with that, Anne, I think you've got sort of the front row seat to the second item on the list here, the people one. Would love for you to just tell us a little bit about the work that you do, and also just share with us kind of some of your trends and predictions just to kick things off. What were some of the main things you saw in 2021 you think are going to stay with us into 2022?
Yeah, thank you for having me, and I'm excited to share some of the takeaways that I saw. So I'll share a little bit about what I saw last year and what people got really good at and what was helpful, and then would love to share with you some recent adventures in training in the real world that happened just this week in California. But so if we take a look at last year, what was really great is that COVID kind of accelerated this idea that we can learn, we can connect, we can collaborate online. So we all had to get a little bit better at it and faster at it. And from a person who does training and coaching, so our company, Ward Certified, helps people with customer service, management, team building, and presentation skills. And what we found is that when we're remote and everyone's on a screen, that we got more collaboration in some ways if the leader allowed it. So if you make space for it, people talk more because the introverts will speak up in chat or they have time to think about their question and they're connecting. So we actually had greater conversations in some ways because those extroverts didn't take over the room, which was fantastic. We we had great strategies with that to try to get people involved. But then if we go forward now, I'll talk about what happened this week. So the training that we did was team building training for a group of product leaders, and we were in California. We had one day in the room. They were trying to work on their product roadmap for the year. And so we had to take a look at the processes and the measurement and the people, and certainly technology is a big part of that. But what we found is we had to start with the processes. And I want to share two things. So, what we did in that room, but also learnings from being in the real world. So, the first part is thinking about the poll. I want to go back to your poll, John, and think about where those numbers are so close. I would say processes probably came higher because people are looking for structure and a roadmap. So we know change is all around us, everything we're doing. We're talking about change in the weather, change at work, change in how we work, change in people, so much change. And I think process gives us something to hang on to. And so I liken it to when you're driving on a foggy day, you drive a little slower, you drive more cautiously, you try to put some extra lighting on, and imagine that your team is doing that. If they're going slower, not contributing, afraid to ask questions, afraid to participate, they're not going to bring their best selves to work. So that process can give them the signposts and say, this is where we're going. This is how we're going to get there. We're going to get there together. And so the training that I did with this group in California, we started with what is our goal? I mean, they came up with an easy mantra, a slogan, if you will, to say this is the culture, this is our goal, this is a one-liner that will help us drive everything we want to do. And then we said, what are the behaviors? What will it look like if we're doing that well? What will it look like if we're not doing it well? And then we learned how to give feedback. If it's done well, how can we celebrate and give positive feedback? If it's not done well, how will we guide that performance? How will we give people a little nudge to get them back on track? And that's the hard part because we're not used to talking anymore. We're used to chatting, typing, slacking, and that conversation in real life in a room was exciting and scary and hard, all of those things in a room and really effective. So that was the content, and that sort of relates to the poll that you did. But I want to take you back to going into that training room was really interesting this year. We had 25 people in the room, and there was energy, and it was good energy and scared energy. And I think that's what we're going to see in all of our hybrid events. That's what we're going to see as we start having more hybrid meetings. Is there's a different energy in the room. Somebody I was talking to said it's like we all have this backpack full of rocks. So we've had the last couple of years of things happen to us, and now we're showing up and excited to be with people, but also thinking, I don't know how to have a conversation anymore. And so there was that coffee conversation and that awkwardness, and there's certainly a lot of Saturday Night Live skits about people just making a bunch of faux pas and not knowing how to talk. So we had to build in time to let them talk and then connect and then say and be vulnerable. I think that's another thing we learned last year is how to be more authentic and vulnerable. So people in the room had to learn to say, I don't know how to do this, or I'm afraid of doing this, or I'm kind of nervous about being in the room. And even at the last minute, they had a couple of people that didn't show up live because they just didn't feel comfortable. So we had to flex and it became a hybrid session.
So that's a huge one, I think, for people right now, especially I would expect that in the next few months, we're going to see events that were expected to be all in, not be, whether that's smaller internal events or whether that's industry events as well. I'd be curious, what are some of the things you've seen work effectively to ensure that that hybrid engagement is really positive and not sort of an afterthought?
A couple things. So the first is it's the mantra. The new mantra's got to be remote first. So you've got to think about whoever's remote gets your attention first. And we have to do that to deal with proximity bias. We have to do that to make sure it's inclusive. But what we did in that room was we said if one person's on a camera, everyone's on a camera. So if one person's on a laptop, so there was 24 people all with laptops open, and it seems weird to be in a room but also looking at the Zoom screen with the person beside you. But that's how you get that collaboration. That's how you get that inclusiveness. And it worked really well in that we didn't have to kill as many trees with flip charts. We could open up a Word document and collaboratively work on things, or do pods of people and work on things, and even doing breakout rooms in a session like that. But it has to be remote first, and test their audio, test their ability to check in, find out how they're doing, come up with systems so that they can have a buddy in the room, so that if they do want to speak up and no one's listening to them, that buddy in the room, I might say, Joe, pair up with Megan. And if Megan has something to say, Joe can be her voice in the room, said, Megan's got a comment. So have an accountability buddy. We put signs on chairs around the room so we would remember, hold a chair for them, that they were there, to make it inclusive and keep them in the room. And let's see, and just sharing those documents, it was kind of nice because it was so much faster to share a document. I mean, how many times have you put something on a flip chart and then left the room and forgot the brilliance that was captured? It's now in a living document that's shared right away. So that was really, really helpful.
And
I love how you said
everywhere are crying. Sorry.
Go ahead. Yeah, I was just going to say, I loved how earlier how you kind of acknowledged the introvert and the extrovert aspect of people, and somewhat confusing to people because I've been a CMO for 10 years and I'm a closet introvert. And for that kind of role, people expect that you're very extroverted. Fast forward to this environment for an introvert, this is a pretty comfortable environment to be in because you're always in familiar surroundings. You can, hole up, yet you can be out there on chat or on blogs or on other ways that perhaps maybe you weren't before. So I guess, my question going into that conversation with that room full of people, how did you differentiate between the extrovert and the introvert? Or did that just kind of naturally come out as a result of just people haven't been together in 2 years, so everybody's just so excited to see one another? Maybe everybody's an extrovert in that kind of environment.
I think, what I had to do was build in time in the agenda to revisit things. So what we did in that one is we came up with that culture slogan or market. We came up with a slogan in the beginning, and we went back to it after lunch. And we said, let's come back to that. Are we still on board? Does this still make sense now that we've been working with it? And I did that deliberately to give those introverts that prefer to have more time to mull it over and think it through. I gave them a chance to come back and say, I've been thinking, I really don't like that word. Can we change that word? And so that's how you sort of build it in, by giving them more time. Yes, you acknowledge those extroverts, and thank goodness for the extroverts because they keep the energy in the room high. But you do have to be mindful of those breaks and be mindful of where the energy is going and just map out the agenda accordingly. The other funny thing that happened was there was something where there was somebody in the room that did not like the way it was going, and he actually got up and left the room because nobody wanted his word in it. He came back later. He had just to regroup and think about it, and we checked in with him and said, tell me what's going on, and as you do as a facilitator. But what I realized is when we're virtual, if I was having a moment, I can just take my camera off. But in the real world, we can't just turn our camera off. So he had to regroup. And I think some of those behaviors are going to show up, that we got pretty comfortable with muting ourselves. You can't just mute yourself in a room. You can't just have that chat sidebar in a room like we used to.
Yeah, I particularly appreciate the idea of building in more time. I think that's something we often get wrong when we're constructing agendas, whether it's just a meeting or whether it's a large event, right, is thinking about just exactly how much time you need to build in for people to talk to each other. And I hadn't thought about it from the point of view of, and it's even more time when actually we are out of practice and it's going to take us a minute to get into a conversation and to leave a conversation. It's going to be harder. And I think event planners and people who are, coming up with workshop agendas and other things are really going to need to be mindful of that. And then and if you've got hybrid too, people going in and, needing to get off camera for a second or two and coming back, all of those pieces are really, they change the way you construct that agenda. But I know, Anne, one of the things you have seen for a number of years is kind of the way that people present and the things that really land well and don't with audiences. And I'm thinking a lot about, the difference between the kind of arm waving presentation that gets a big arena full of people excited versus the kind of thing that's effective in an online setting, even if it's the same number of people, even if you got, say, 1,000 people in the room and 1,000 people online, it's not the same kind of interaction that's going to get that audience engaged. What are some of the things that you see that are differences between sort of that in-person and that large group online experience?
Yeah, I think the biggest one is when we're in that large audience, we get our energy. As a presenter, you get your energy from the audience. And we can't do that anymore because there's no energy coming from that camera. So you have to make the energy somehow. And that's what I work with a lot of presenters on is how can we find that energy for you? Is it looking at something that makes you smile? Is it putting some fun pictures of people that you might be presenting to behind your camera so you've got a fake audience to look at? Is it getting up and doing some jumping jacks or just getting your blood flowing so that you can do that? For more cerebral, introverted sort of people, it's not about the physical nature of it, but it's thinking about the value that you're offering. Because a lot of times people will say to me, I've given this content, I've delivered this 15 times, I'm kind of over it. Well, if you've delivered it 15 times, that's great because that means you know it. Now you get to bring it to life. So now focus on what is the value for your audience. Don't think about you, but what are they going to do with this content? How are they going to use it? How's it going to help their bottom line, their business, their job? Focus on that and see if that will bring you the joy and the energy. And the energy needs to be amped up 10, 20 times. I'd see if Ross has any thoughts on how he does it, because he definitely brings great energy. But if you think about technology-wise, there's all of these screens we have to get through. So we're not there in person. So we have to amp up the energy and bring our acting skills to it, because you're going to feel when you're recording yourself, you feel like I'm so over the top, but it just gets diluted through the camera and through that recording that somebody's watching. So a lot of times it's kind of acting skills that we have to learn to sit up taller, look at the camera, not read, please no reading. Use your hands if you normally use them, use your facial expressions, and then use a voice that gives the image that you want to have. And I like the idea of recording yourself and then watching it without the visuals and just listen to your voice. Would you want to listen to you? Would you believe you? And if not, then we've got to add some inflection.
Oh, goodness. There's all sorts of psychological implications there. Would you want to listen to you?
That too.
Whole other problem. But no, it's great advice though. And vice versa, right? Like, would you want to watch this person? Like, would you be comfortable? But I appreciate that. I wish I could find it. There's a great article I read years ago before I did video recordings for the first time doing learning courses. And it basically said you were going to feel utterly and totally ridiculous with the appropriate level of energy.
Right.
So for this audience, but anyhow, John, you look like you had a comment. I'll let you jump in.
Well, I think I did hear Anne saying, like it or not, that we've got to get training or train ourselves in this. Ironically, well, not ironically, wonderfully, the kind of Instagram, TikTok generation has already trained themselves. Mm-hmm. So what I see in my organization is that the people under 30 are way better at recorded webinars and live webinars, just sort of naturally. It's amazing.
Yeah.
What makes them way better, out of curiosity, John? Like, what are you noticing that they're doing differently that us old folk aren't?
They seem natural.
Yeah.
They have the right pacing. They have subtracted a lot of the gorpy stuff that we used to put into our PowerPoints. So I think there's less information being crammed into, let's say, a 30-minute space, but that's because the audience, something about the interface, the audience really doesn't want as much information.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's your ability. Well, I think, really good on stage presenters already know this, but most of us, unlike Megan, have not presented to thousands of people. So that pacing is closer, but the presentations you have to do actually have much less information in them than I typically would like to do, because I'm more of a written guy. So translating my writing to Zoom has taken a lot of learning, but I can learn from my younger colleagues.
Yeah. Yeah, I like to say you write for the stage, not the page. And so many of us, so many of you are great writers, but when you're speaking to a camera, when you're speaking to an audience, the shorter the sentence, the punchier it is, the easier it is for your audience to hear it and absorb it and remember it.
So I think the message, one takeaway that I have is to press on my management somehow, or maybe get Ann to, that they're not coming across the way they want on their Zoom presentations to the organization.
Right. Yes. And we'd love to help with that. And that's because we don't, to Megan's point earlier, we don't want to watch ourselves. We don't want to listen to ourselves. That's a hard thing to do, but it's a really important thing to do. And the more you do it, the easier it gets. And that's what you're describing, John, with the younger generation. They're constantly walking around, taking videos and posting it, and they're more comfortable with it. So we can learn from that.
Well, before we get too close to the end of our time, and you were talking earlier in this session that you did the other day about sort of change management and some of the components of change management. And John Steiner, when we joined earlier, you were talking about the challenge of that as well. I think that's become one of the biggest needs I've heard. And I think, and you approach it from a very sort of communication-centric point of view. And I think it's so often overlooked. And especially because a lot of the people that listen and watch this particular show are a bit more senior and often have a lot of change that they need to make in their organizations. And I would love for you any, sort of observations or advice of things that you see sort of that are challenges that people have, and maybe a couple of solutions that you've seen be successful or ways to break that challenge down.
Yeah. I think change is going to be the thing that makes us successful going forward. Just being agile, even walking into the room on Monday and on Tuesday, I thought it was going to be in person, and then two people can't show up. So on the fly, you have to switch your opening, switch the format, open up the laptop. So our ability to be agile is going to be really critical in all of our roles. The process I like to think about with change is start with, what are we trying to achieve? You've got to have a really clear goal, and that goal's got to be so easy for all of us to understand. And that's what I like to work with people on, is come up with a mantra or a slogan that we can throw into every conversation, into every Slack, into every email. And even if you think of, example, Nordstrom's comes to mind, hassle-free returns. So that's all I have. If I work at Nordstrom, all I know, you show up, the famous story, you show up with a tire that you want to return. We don't sell tires, but I'm going to give you your money back because it's hassle-free returns. So I don't have to think about it. I don't have to waste anybody's time. I know what my job is. And so if you can come up with that goal for the team, for the company, for your group, then they know how to behave. And then make a list of what other behaviors look like and be really clear on it. I will know we're successful when people start saying this, when they start showing up in a meeting like this, when they respond like this. And then what will I see that I don't want to see? And then how do I give feedback? And practicing giving feedback on, we agreed to show up on time for our meetings. Today you were a little late. When you're late, we don't accomplish our goals. What happened? Have a conversation. What can you do next time? Solve it, move on. So it's really the goals, the behaviors, and then guiding and celebrating, but also guiding the things that aren't being done right so that we meet those goals. Because as John would say, activity matters.
And John or Joe, I'm happy to give you both an opportunity if you have any questions, especially Joe. I know we haven't heard any questions from you, so please jump in. We haven't given you a chance.
Awesome, thanks. Hey, Anne, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, yeah, nice to meet you.
Good to meet you too. Um, Quick question for you in terms of selecting someone internally. How do you identify someone internally who can be a spokesperson? Someone, obviously a subject matter expert, someone who really knows what they're talking about. But how do you go about finding someone who can take the lead and kind of be almost like the face of a company?
Ooh. Hmm. That's a big question. So I think it would depend on what do you want, what are you trying to exude? What is the image you want the face of the company to be? And then I would look for the person that most naturally delivers on that. So a real quick story. I worked for Walt Disney World many years ago, and my interview, take a guess at how long the interview was to get the job at the best customer service company in the world.
Uh, 15 minutes? I feel
Exactly.
like this is a trick question.
You answered it right. Most people say like
Okay.
2 hours, 6 weeks,
Right.
whatever. You expect it to be so
Yeah.
long. It really is it was 15 minutes. And all they were looking for is when
Wow.
I walked into that room, did I smile? Did I look wholesome enough to represent their
Right.
brand? And that's what you're looking
Wow.
for. And I think you can train people on the knowledge and the skills and, but what do you want them to look like and sound like naturally so that they represent you best?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
could see that. Does finding someone who already is naturally that way, and then you can add. That makes a lot of sense. Awesome.
Yeah,
Appreciate
that's what I'm really thinking. Just to echo that, Joe, I have to break apart you mentioned they really understand our stuff. They're kind of a thought leader. Actually, I think in this world, that's not what matters. It's how they look and how natural they are in communicating.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add this thought that's really been apparent to me. I guess maybe because during COVID, I've spent more time working with salespeople in a way. And it is that I used to think that sales organizations were not process oriented because absent the ones that had a sales methodology, that they seemed to jump around a lot. But as I've thought about it, the process of coaching, which has really become important, and it's growing in our industry anyway, coaching and the systems and measurements that they're using. But the process of coaching is change management. It is a process. And so then it struck me that actually a lot more change management is going on naturally in sales organizations. And there's something about marketing organizations that have not resourced themselves for, as Sirius has always said, A, for training, B, for then change. And so I think I look back at ourselves as marketers and I say that, well, change management is a problem with the marketing organization because it is not part of our systemic effort. We're managing tasks, we're managing KPIs. We're not very good at training for change. And I think we have to get back to that because that's where innovation actually expresses itself. And the people coming up need to learn how to innovate effectively at scale, and change management is essential to that. So that was long, but learning from sales is, I think, is really important. Sales knows how to coach people.
Well, they do a
Yeah,
lot
there's
more
just
of
a
it
whole-
too,
oh, go
from
ahead,
a
John.
coaching perspective than the marketers do. Like it's almost in their DNA to do that coaching. So, in fact, that was going to be one of my questions, and I know we're pressing on time here, but maybe my last question to Anne on the coaching side, thinking about salespeople and in particular what we call BDR or SDR, which is the feeder system typically to an account executive or a career path to an account executive. They're usually on the younger side, fresh out of school, 2 to 3 years experience. They may not have the depth of presentation skills, although to John's point, maybe they do a great job at it. What kind of resources would you suggest they look toward or get trained up on how to present, given that they're interacting every day with people on the phone, on Zoom, and their transactions are very, very small. Like they've got a very limited window to get people's attention. Like what would you suggest for somebody in that kind of role?
Ward certified is what I'd suggest, but I would say certainly coaching, and there's such a great opportunity for coaching because of Zoom. Pardon me, because you can record that interaction and then the manager can sit with them and say, what did you notice? What went well? What would you want to change? And the manager can record themselves and say, notice how I handled this and what did you notice and how could you incorporate that? So I think there's a lot of internal coaching that can happen, and then reach out to externals for extra pieces. But I think the biggest training that I would offer the younger people coming into any organization is how to listen. The better you listen to your clients, the better. And even to John's point, they may be a great presenter, but if they're presenting on the wrong thing because they didn't listen to what that person really wanted to talk about, or if they talk over that person or talk about the wrong thing, they're missing an opportunity.
Cool. Thanks, everybody. Happy holidays.
Yeah, John and Joe, thank you for being great attendees throughout our journey over the last 6 months or so. We've really appreciated you both being here pretty regularly and sharing your thoughts and your feedback as well. And many, many thanks to you for joining us today. And I really do feel like this was a